When did loyalty demand you protect a devastating secret? The moment the doctor's words hung in the sterile air, a cold dread snaked its way through my chest, twisting tightly around my lungs. It wasn't just the news about my brother that shocked me, although that was bad enough. No, it was the chilling, impossible detail that accompanied it, the one that made my blood run cold and brought into sharp focus the moral tightrope I was now teetering on. Do you protect the truth, no matter how devastating and unbelievable, or do you shield a family, even if it means perpetuating a lie that could unravel everything? I stood there, rooted to the spot, knowing that the decision I made in the next few minutes would either cement my loyalty or shatter the trust of everyone I cared about. It had started, as most disasters do, with something mundane. My Tuesday morning had kicked off with the usual struggle against the snooze button, the smell of burnt toast from the kitchen, a signature George, my brother, and the incessant chirping of the city outside my third-floor apartment. I remember glancing at the calendar, noting a week left until I had to finally commit to a new work project, the one that Mark Diaz, 41M, the office gossip, and my perpetually hovering cubicle mate had already tried to pump me for details on at least 5 times. My name is Linda Gray, 37F, and if there's one thing I pride myself on, it's my loyalty. Loyalty to my job, my friends, and especially my family. Sometimes, though, that loyalty feels less like a strength and more like a heavy anchor. That Tuesday, I was looking forward to a quiet day at my desk, maybe even a lunch break not interrupted by Mark's latest conspiracy theory about the CEO's new to pay. My routine was a comfort, a predictable rhythm that kept the chaos of the world at bay. I commuted on the same bus, bought the same lukewarm coffee from the kiosk downstairs, and greeted the same security guard, Mr. Henderson, with the same forced smile. Work was, well, work. Our marketing department was a maelstrom of deadlines and PowerPoints, but I found my peace in the meticulous organization of data, the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly crafted campaign brief. My phone buzzed around 10:30 a.m. It was an unknown number, which was unusual. I typically ignored those, but a strange instinct, a prickle on my neck, made me answer. "Is this Linda Gray?" a calm, professional voice asked. "Yes, it is," I replied, my fingers automatically pausing over my keyboard. "This is Nurse Jenkins from St. Jude's Hospital. We have a patient here, a George Murphy, who listed you as his emergency contact." My heart did a strange little flip. George Murphy, 47M, was my older brother, my only sibling. George, the overachiever, the one who always had his life perfectly together, who made partner at his law firm before he was 40, who ran marathons in his spare time and probably ironed his socks. George, who rarely, if ever, got sick. The last time he'd been in a hospital was for a minor appendectomy when we were kids. "George, what happened? Is he okay?" I stammered, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. Nurse Jenkins' tone remained level. "He was brought in by ambulance this morning after a collapse at his office. He's currently stable, but he suffered a severe fall and we're running tests. Would appreciate it if you could come down as soon as possible." "I am on my way," I said, already grabbing my bag, my mind racing. A collapse? George? This was completely out of character. He ate organic, exercised religiously, never smoked, barely drank. He was the picture of health. The idea of him collapsing at work was like imagining the sun suddenly deciding not to rise. My chest tightened with an unfamiliar anxiety. I sent a quick, terse text to my boss, "Family emergency, leaving now. We'll call with update." I didn't bother telling Mark, knowing he'd already be halfway through fabricating a dramatic tale of my sudden departure for the entire office. As I hurried out of the building, the crisp autumn air did little to cool the heat rising in my face. Bus ride felt interminable, each red light a personal affront. My fingers kept drumming against my knee, a nervous habit I hadn't indulged since college finals. St. Jude's was a maze of white walls and hushed urgency. The antiseptic smell hit me first, that distinctive hospital scent that always makes me feel a little queasy. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, following signs to emergency admissions, my mind replaying Nurse Jenkins' words. Severe fall? Tests. What kind of tests? Was it his heart? A stroke? George was only 47, for crying out loud. I found the nurse's station, a flurry of activity, and finally spotted Nurse Jenkins, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes. "Linda Gray, for George Murphy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her expression softening with a professional sympathy that did little to calm my nerves. "Right this way, Ms. Gray. He's in observation room 3. The doctor just finished his initial assessment." The observation room was small, with a single bed, a monitoring machine beeping softly, and an IV drip attached to a man's arm. He was pale, his eyes closed, a light blanket pulled up to his chin. He looked small, not like George. George was always so imposing, so full of energy. My breath hitched. As I stepped closer, a chilling jolt went through me. This wasn't George. My brother had a distinctive scar above his left eyebrow from a bike accident as a kid, a small, almost imperceptible one, but I knew it well. He also had a mole, a faint brown speck on his right cheekbone. This man had neither. His hair was a different shade of brown, his nose slightly wider, his jawline softer. My George was sharper, more angular, with a permanent crease between his brows from years of intense concentration. This man was a stranger. I paused, my hand half raised, my brain struggling to reconcile what my eyes were seeing with what I knew. "Nurse Jenkins," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I think there's been a mistake. This isn't my brother, George Murphy." Nurse Jenkins frowned, consulting her clipboard. "Are you certain, Ms. Gray?" This patient was identified at the scene as George Murphy. His wallet, driver's license, and all his personal effects corroborate that. Even his work ID from Preston and Finch Law Firm. Pointed to a small clear plastic bag on the bedside table. Inside, I could see a wallet, a phone, and a laminated ID badge. My eyes instinctively went to the photo on the ID. It was unmistakably George's face, his professional, slightly stern expression staring back. But the man in the bed, it wasn't him. My mind reeled. How could this be? The ID, the wallet, the name, all George's. But the person, the actual living, breathing person lying in that hospital bed, was not my brother. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't just a simple mix-up. This was something far, far stranger. Just then, a man in scrubs entered the room. He had a kind, tired face and dark circles under his eyes. "Ms. Gray, I'm Dr. Alistair Finch," he said, extending a hand. "I'm glad you're here. Your brother George had a rather severe collapse. We suspect a significant cardiac event, possibly a heart attack, but we're still running tests to confirm the extent of the damage. He also sustained a concussion from the fall." He gestured to the man on the bed. "He's stable now, but he's unresponsive. We're hopeful he'll wake soon, but depending on the extent of the cardiac damage, recovery could be lengthy and complex. I understand this is shocking news, but we need you to make some decisions regarding his immediate care, given his unresponsive state." I stared at the doctor, then back at the man in the bed, then at the ID badge, then back at the man again. My mouth felt dry, like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. The man on the bed was not George, but everything else, every single piece of evidence the hospital had, screamed that he was. The identity theft theme suddenly slammed into me with terrifying force. My initial thought had been a medical emergency, but this was something else entirely. "Dr. Finch," I managed to choke out, my voice still a ghost of its usual self. I really don't think this is my brother. I know his face. This isn't him." Dr. Finch's brow furrowed, a flicker of professional concern mixed with something like disbelief crossing his face. "Ms. Gray, are you quite sure? We verified his identity multiple ways. His fingerprints match his driver's license on file. His phone contacts list you as Linda's sister. His personal effects, as Nurse Jenkins mentioned, are all consistent." He picked up the wallet from the bag and showed me the driver's license. It was a photo of George, the true George, his serious expression staring out from the laminated card. My stomach churned. This was a nightmare. A surreal, impossible nightmare. If this wasn't George, then where was George? Who was this man, lying in a hospital bed under my brother's name, carrying my brother's wallet, his ID, even his phone? Was George in trouble? Was he hurt somewhere else? Or worse? My loyalty was being tested in a way I could never have imagined. My brother was the overachiever, the one who never put a foot wrong. The idea of him being involved in something like this, something so deeply unsettling, was unfathomable. Yet here it was. "I need a moment," I mumbled, turning away from the doctor, my gaze falling on the small window looking out onto the hospital grounds. The world outside looked so normal, so utterly oblivious to the bizarre, terrifying situation unfolding within these walls. The ethical dilemma from my earlier thoughts slammed into me. This man was gravely ill. He needed medical attention, and the hospital believed he was my brother. If I revealed the truth, what would happen to him? Would they still treat him with the same urgency if he was suddenly an unidentified John Doe? And what about George? If I exposed this, what kind of danger would I be putting my real brother in? I thought of Mark, the office gossip. He had a sixth sense for scandal, a nose for anything that smelled of trouble. He'd probably already heard about my sudden departure from work and was no doubt spinning elaborate tales. The thought of this situation, this bewildering, inexplicable reality, ever reaching his ears made me feel physically ill. This was not something I could discuss with him, or with anyone, it seemed, until I understood what was happening. Dr. Finch, sensing my distress, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ms. Gray, I understand this is a lot to take in. Perhaps you're just in shock. It does look a bit different from his driver's license photo. People often do in these situations, especially after trauma. But medically, we need to proceed. We've identified severe arterial blockages. He needs a catheterization procedure, possibly even open heart surgery, and we need your consent as next of kin." My mind raced, grappling with the weight of the decision. Consent to major surgery for a man who wasn't my brother, but who everyone believed was. Man who was carrying my brother's identity? It felt both wrong and utterly necessary. If I denied consent, would I be dooming a man, a stranger, to death? But if I gave it, I was essentially participating in a deception, no matter how unwittingly. The internal struggle was excruciating. My loyalty, my unwavering commitment to family, usually provided a clear path forward. But now, it was a tangled mess of conflicting impulses. Loyalty to George meant protecting him, finding him, understanding why his identity was being used in this way. But loyalty to humanity, to the basic decency of helping someone in desperate need, meant making sure this man received the life-saving care he required. I took a deep, shuddering breath. My decision needed to be practical, immediate. The medical needs of the patient in front of me were paramount. The mystery of the identity could wait. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Okay, Dr. Finch, do what you need to do." Consent given. A sigh of relief escaped the doctor. "Thank you, Ms. Gray. We'll get him prepped immediately. He's very lucky you got here so quickly." Lucky. The word echoed hollowly. Lucky for whom? As Dr. Finch left the room to make arrangements, I walked over to the bedside table and picked up the clear plastic bag. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the wallet. Inside, alongside the driver's license that showed my real brother's face, were credit cards, a health insurance card, a gym membership card, all bearing the name George Murphy. The phone was a familiar model, the same one George used. My gaze fell on the lock screen. It was a photo of me and George, taken years ago at our parents' anniversary party, both of us laughing, our arms around each other. My real brother. My heart ached with a terrifying premonition. I unlocked the phone George's birthday, his usual easy-to-guess password. I scrolled through the recent calls. There was a long list of outgoing calls to numbers I didn't recognize, but then towards the top, a call from yesterday evening lasting several minutes to a number labeled Mum and Dad. I froze. My parents had passed away 5 years ago. Cold, clammy sweat broke out on my forehead. This was beyond identity theft. This was something else entirely. As I stood there, phone in hand, an overwhelming sense of foreboding washed over me. I needed to understand what was happening, and fast. The The hospital might be bustling with life-saving procedures, but I knew with chilling certainty that my own crisis was just beginning. I had to find George, my real brother, before it was too late, and I had no idea where to even start. I stared at the phone, the innocuous photo of George and me mocking the chilling reality. Mom and Dad, my parents were gone. This wasn't just identity theft, it was a ghost in the machine, a meticulously constructed facade. My fingers tightened on the phone, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning confusion in my gut. What kind of person creates a fake life so complete it includes dead parents? And why George's life? Dr. Finch's footsteps receded, leaving me alone with the man in the bed, the imposter. A gaze swept over his face again, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of the George I knew. Nothing. Just a stranger, breathing George's air, carrying George's wallet, living a life that was undeniably, terrifyingly not his own. The decision to consent to the surgery now felt like an impossible tightrope walk over a chasm of unknowns. I had saved a life, but whose? And at what cost to George, my real George? I carefully placed the phone back in the plastic bag. I couldn't leave it here. If the hospital ever discovered it wasn't George, if they started digging, this phone, with its fabricated contact list and the photo of my deceased parents, would be a dead giveaway. I made a snap decision. I'd take the wallet and phone with me, under the guise of securing George's personal effects. No one would question it. As I slipped them into my bag, a nurse poked her head in. "Ms. Gray, we're taking Mr. Murphy to prep for the cath lab. You can wait in the family lounge on the second floor." "Thank you," I managed, my voice still reedy. "I'll be there shortly." I walked out of the room, my legs feeling like lead. The antiseptic smell, once merely nauseating, now felt suffocating. My mind raced, trying to find a starting point in this labyrinthine nightmare. My priority had to be George. Where was he? Was he hurt? Was he even alive? The thought was a sharp, icy spike in my chest. Then, how to unravel this tangled web without incriminating my brother, or condemning the stranger whose life I had just signed off on? My loyalty was a compass spinning wildly, pointing in every direction at once. 3 days later, the hospital felt like a second home, a place of constant low-level dread. The patient formerly known as George Murphy, whom I now privately referred to as John Doe, a name that felt more fitting for his ghost-like presence, was out of surgery and stable. He remained unresponsive, hooked up to a dizzying array of machines that beeped and whirred, each sound a tiny pinprick of anxiety. Dr. Finch was cautiously optimistic, but stressed the long road to recovery. I'd spent hours by his bedside, watching, searching his inert face for answers, but finding none. It also spent hours covertly investigating. George's apartment was the first stop. Using a spare key he'd given me years ago for emergencies, I let myself into his meticulously clean, minimalist sanctuary. Everything was in its place, almost too perfect. No sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no frantic messages. His laptop was gone, but that wasn't unusual. He often carried it between work and home. His digital photo frames, usually cycling through pictures of George at various achievements, scaling mountains, accepting awards, standing next to a sleek new car, now displayed only generic landscapes. A small, unsettling detail. Someone had been thorough. I found George's spare passport in a locked drawer. My real brother's face stared back at me, younger, less burdened. The passport was valid. His driver's license, which the hospital had, was the only piece of ID I could confirm was with the imposter. This meant someone had cloned his ID, or George had lost it, and this man found it, or... My mind couldn't even grasp the implications of a targeted, sophisticated identity theft like this. My attempts to contact George's colleagues were met with polite, concerned replies. They knew he'd collapsed, and that he was in St. Jude's. No one expressed surprise beyond the initial shock of his illness. Mark, predictably, had already started an office pool on George's recovery time. "Linda, tell me, is he going to be back for the quarterly report? Mr. Henderson downstairs said you look positively green when you left that day. People are saying it's stress-related. You know, George always was a workhorse. Probably pushed himself too hard." His voice, usually grating, now just felt like background noise. I managed to fend him off with vague statements about George's condition, thanking my lucky stars he was too focused on the story to notice my peculiar detachment. I checked George's bank accounts online. Activity was normal until the day of the collapse. A few large transactions, typical for his business, then nothing. No suspicious withdrawals. No credit card fraud alerts. This wasn't a simple case of someone stealing his cards. This was something far deeper, far more insidious. I felt a growing sense of dread. My George the overachiever, always so careful, so by the book? What had he gotten himself into? Was this connected to his work? He dealt with high-stakes corporate law, mergers, acquisitions, sometimes shady characters. My loyalty to him, once a comforting anchor, now felt like a lead weight, dragging me into murky waters. A week had passed. John Doe was beginning to show flickers of awareness, a slight twitch of a finger, a slow blink of his eyelids. It was progress, Dr. Finch said, but still no communication. This development only amplified my dilemma. When he woke up, what would I say? How would I explain the lie? My investigation continued to yield more questions than answers. It discreetly visited Preston and Finch, George's law firm. His assistant, a stern woman named Alina, looked harried. "Mr. Murphy's calendar is completely clear, Ms. Gray. All his cases have been reassigned." And I asked about his last day. She mentioned he'd had a particularly intense meeting scheduled with a client named Silverstream Acquisitions. "A very private matter, Ms. Gray. Mr. Murphy was handling it personally." She had no further details. I tried researching Silverstream Acquisitions. It was a shell company, incorporated recently, with no public profile beyond a vague business registration. This was a red flag. George dealt with legitimate, albeit sometimes aggressive, clients. Shell companies weren't his usual MO. I sat in my apartment late one night, the wallet spread on my coffee table, trying to make sense of the chaos. The driver's license, credit cards, the phone, all belonging to George. My George. The imposter's clothes, which the hospital had bagged and given to me, were high quality, exactly George's style and size. It was as if someone had dressed him specifically to resemble my brother, then injected him with my brother's professional identity. This wasn't a random theft, it was a targeted, elaborate substitution. I scrolled through the imposter's phone again. The call to Mum and Dad stood out like a sore thumb. I opened George's real phone, the one he always carried, which Id found in his apartment. Its call logs were normal. I compared the two. The imposter's phone had a different carrier, a different model, though it looked identical at first glance. It was a fake, a prop. My real George's phone was older, scratched, familiar. Became clear, the imposter hadn't stolen George's phone. He was carrying an asterisk duplicate phone, cloned with George's contacts and a few selective photos designed to pass scrutiny. This level of planning, it terrified me. My brother, the paragon of order, was embroiled in something deeply dangerous. My loyalty demanded I act, but how? My mind, usually so clear, felt clouded by fear. I needed help, professional help. This wasn't a family drama I could solve with a stern word and a comforting hug. This was a criminal matter. But if I went to the police, what would I tell them? My brother's identity has been stolen by a man who's now in a coma in a hospital. And oh, by the way, he looks kind of like my brother but isn't, and I gave consent for his surgery? They'd think I was delusional. Or worse, complicit. A month had passed since the terrifying Tuesday. Hundo was still recovering, his progress slow but steady. He was now able to communicate in short, slurred sentences, mostly questions about where he was and who I was. He had no memory of the collapse, no memory of how he came to be George Murphy. Partial amnesia, Dr. Finch had explained, common after severe head trauma. This was both a relief and a new layer of complexity. How could I confront him about George if he didn't even know who George was? My daily routine was a blur of work, hospital visits, and a clandestine investigation that felt increasingly futile. Mark had grown more persistent, his inquiries about George veering from nosy to genuinely concerned. Linda, you look exhausted. Are you sure you're okay? George has been in there for weeks. Is it? Serious? His voice, usually laced with thinly veiled schadenfreude, now had a note of genuine worry. It was unsettling. It always written Mark off as a shallow gossip, but his persistent, almost clumsy, kindness was starting to chip away at my rigid perception of him. Perhaps my own judgment, honed by years of trying to be the loyal, put-together sister to George's overachieving perfection, had been too narrow. One afternoon, while I was at the hospital, an officer from the fraud department visited George's room. He was following up on an anonymous tip about a potential identity discrepancy regarding George Murphy. My blood ran cold. Someone was onto it. I immediately called a trusted friend, Sarah, a retired private investigator I knew from a volunteer group. I explained the situation, omitting George's name at first, framing it as a hypothetical. Her advice was blunt. Linda, this isn't a hypothetical. This is sophisticated. You need to verify who this man is and who George really is away from the hospital. Police won't help much until they understand the scope, and that could endanger your brother. Sarah connected me with a discreet, highly reputable cybersecurity and fraud investigation firm. It was expensive, far more than I could afford, but I had to know. I used George's emergency savings, justifying it as an investment in his safety. The firm assigned a lead investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Detective Miller. My first meeting with her was a blur of facts, evidence, and my own mounting panic. I laid out everything. The 2 phones, the inconsistent ID, the shell company, the amnesiac imposter. Miller listened, her face impassive. This is a professional job, Ms. Gray. George Murphy was targeted. The amnesia complicates things, but it's possible it's genuine or a very convincing act. We'll need access to everything. His apartment, his digital footprints, his professional life. The process was slow, painstaking. Miller's team meticulously sifted through George's digital life, tracing breadcrumbs. They found encrypted files on his computer at work, files Alina, his assistant, hadn't been able to open. They found burner phones George had been using, unbeknownst to me. My brother, the paragon of integrity, had a secret life. Weeks later, the breakthrough came. Miller called me. Ms. Gray, we found him. My breath hitched. George Murphy was involved in a highly sensitive, covert investigation for a federal agency. He wasn't just a corporate lawyer. He was working undercover, trying to expose a large-scale identity theft ring operating through shell corporations and a network of highly skilled impersonators. Silverstream Acquisitions was one of their fronts. My mind reeled. Undercover? George, the overachiever who ironed his socks? It seemed impossible. Suddenly, his meticulous nature, his focus, his almost obsessive need for control made sense. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a patriot, a man driven by a profound yet secret sense of justice. This wasn't a loyalty test, it was a revelation of my brother's true character. My initial judgment of him as merely an overachiever felt simplistic, naive. The man in the hospital, Miller continued, is one of their operatives. It was likely a stand-in, meant to impersonate George for a specific high-risk meeting where George suspected he would be compromised or identified. George swapped places with him, but something went wrong. We believe the operative collapsed due to a pre-existing medical condition, perhaps exacerbated by stress or a stimulant, rather than an attack. But the agency lost contact with your brother right after the swap. So where is he? I whispered, my voice trembling. That's what we're trying to find out. The agency is now involved. They have protocols for this. He's either in deep cover or compromised, but given his skills, we have reason to be hopeful. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. My loyalty to George hadn't been misplaced. It had simply been blind to the deeper complexities of his life. I saw my own role in perpetuating the problem. My reluctance to believe George could be involved in anything so unconventional, my assumption that his overachieving was purely for personal gain, prevented me from seeing the layers of his life. My trust in him had been absolute, but my understanding of him had been woefully incomplete. The next day, Mark cornered me at the coffee machine. "Linda, I heard from Mr. Henderson that George's firm sent over a big bouquet of flowers today, and there was a really fancy black car outside the hospital this morning. Is George, going to be famous? Is he okay?" He looked genuinely perplexed, and for the first time, not entirely nosy. I looked at Mark, his wide, curious eyes. Had always dismissed him as a gossip, but perhaps his incessant curiosity was just a clumsy attempt at connection, a way to understand the world around him. Maybe underneath the bravado, he just cared. My perception of him had been so fixed, so dismissive. "He's okay, Mark," I said, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "He's going to be just fine. And yes, he might be famous in his own way." I didn't elaborate, but the quiet satisfaction in my voice must have been enough. True George Murphy resurfaced a week later, safe, tired, and deeply apologetic, appearing at the hospital, looking almost exactly like the man recovering in the room. The initial shock for the hospital staff was immense, requiring several federal agents to explain the situation to bewildered Dr. Finch and Nurse Jenkins. The imposter, now identified as a man named Arthur, remained in recovery, his amnesia a protective shield. Was still John Doe to the world, slowly piecing together fragments of a life that wasn't entirely his own. George and I sat in the quiet of his hospital room, my hand in his, a comfort I hadn't realized I craved until now. He looked exhausted but alive. "I'm so sorry, Linda," he said, his voice rough. "I never wanted you involved. You think it'd have it any other way?" I squeezed his hand. My loyalty hadn't shattered. It had expanded, encompassed more than I thought possible. Wasn't about blindly defending my brother, but about standing by him, even when his life was far more complicated than I could have imagined. We still had a long way to go. Arthur's identity was still a problem. The legal fallout for George was immense, and the emotional toll would be heavy. But we would face it together. The world outside the hospital was still oblivious, but my small world had irrevocably shifted. I had faced the impossible, and in doing so, found a deeper understanding of my brother, of others, and of my own unwavering, though now more nuanced, loyalty.